first doing due diligence reports in writing. I'm going to shut my video for 1 second and I'll be right back. Thank you. Okay. So I'm now going to be sharing my screen with you momentarily to pull up this due diligence report. And as I stated, I find that a written due diligence report is absolutely necessary in every single transaction that's done. The reason being that I believe that when everything is going right, it's never going to be a problem that you didn't have everything in writing. But when something goes wrong, people tend to blame. They look for somebody to blame when something goes wrong. So I have created, and I will admit that I do believe that most of the industry has copied my due diligence report now, and most firms now do reports in writing, not to the extent that my team does, but I do still believe in doing it. I think it's crucial, and I'm going to share my screen with you to pull up the due diligence report that I had done at the building we spoke about, which was 605 Lorimer, and it's a new development. It's a condominium new development in Brooklyn. And I'm going to pull that up for you now. Let's see, here it is. Okay. Now, the due diligence report, as I said, it's a report that I specifically created, and this report is only on, I only use this report for my new development deals. I draft a different form of a report when it comes to my resale properties, as I was saying before. I'm now going to share my screen with you so that everybody can see what I'm looking at. Here we go. All right. I believe everyone can see right now the due diligence report that I have. This was under my old firm name because this was done last year. And this due diligence report for 605 Lorimer, this is exactly what I use on any of my new development deals. It obviously changes from deal to deal, but basically what we're doing is we want to be able to have a format where we can tell the client exactly what they can expect, not the good stuff. The good stuff doesn't matter. My clients already made the decision that they're going to purchase. And so here, I just want to tell them anything that I think that can create a problem later on. So the first thing that I do is I get a copy of the offering plan for the new development. So the offering plans are big books. They're usually pretty thick. And the offering plans are part of the process that's required, unless you get an exception to that requirement, which can happen in certain circumstances, which I'm not going to get into this moment. Here we have the condominium offering plan, and we want to take that condominium offering plan and we want to look at certain things. And in my report are the items that I believe should be looked at in each and every circumstance. So first thing is, how many units are there? Do they come with storage? Do they come with parking? And looking for a description of the property. Now, the unit description in any condominium offering plan can be found in what's called Schedule A. And while we're on here, I'm going to actually pull up for you. I'm going to pull up for you. I want to show you, just for those of you who may not have seen it before, what a Schedule A actually looks like. So I'm going to show you a Schedule A. If I could pull this out now, let's see. Hang on, I'm just looking for it for you. I just want to show you what one looks like so that you guys can know for the future. So here we go. Okay. So here is your Schedule A. And it looks different in every offering plan, but pretty much it's basically where you're getting the unit number, where the tax lot is, and what percentage of common elements comes with the unit. And basically what that means is, if work has to be done in a building, or as common charges get raised, or maybe there's an assessment, what is going to be any one particular owner's portion of it? Now, you can see here, Unit 1, which was the deal that I was working on here, is tax lot 1801. And because of the size of that unit, being the largest unit, it's the first floor in the cellar, and they have a rear garden area that is 24.5%. So that means, let's just say hypothetically, the building was going to be putting in a new roof. If the building was putting in a new roof, my client would be responsible for 24.5% of the cost of doing that. And that's how it works with condominiums. You're paying your increases, you're paying your costs based upon your percentage interest in the common elements. Now, okay, sorry, I was just changing my notifications because I keep hearing beeps. I apologize for that. So that's what Schedule A is. Now I want to go back, though, to the due diligence report that we were just going through so that you can see. I'm going to walk you through this whole thing. Okay, here we go. All right, so here we go. So let me just go back to that one page. Hold on. I want to. That's all right. It doesn't matter. I just wanted to get it on a single page, but it doesn't really make a difference. All right. So anyway, so here we go. This way we can see everything a little bit bigger. Schedule A. Schedule A, like I told you, it will be some form of a diagram, a chart. It explains this particular unit has 2 bedrooms, 2.5 bathrooms. It gives the square footage of it. Remember, condominiums are sold on square footage. Co-op units are not. Now, unit 1 also has part of the rear yard, and it talks about the cellar space and how this cellar can be used. Because technically speaking, basements and cellar spaces, unless they're more than 50% above, excuse me, above grade, they cannot be lived in. Nor can there really be a legal bathroom that has more than 2 fixtures. When I say fixtures, I mean a sink, a bathtub is a fixture, a toilet's a fixture, a sink is a fixture. So you can have a half bath. You can't have a full bath. A full bath would be being done illegally. Doesn't mean it doesn't happen. It just means you're not going to get approval for one if it's in a basement area or cellar, if it's not more than 50% above grade. Just so you know, grade means if you were to look at a building from the side view, sidewalk, so like this is the sidewalk, and if you were to go on the sidewalk, because the building's facing out, the front windows are facing this way, and you look here, here's the sidewalk, you're looking at it from that angle, and now you look in the back where that sidewalk is. If that lower level is more than 50% below grade from that sidewalk view, then you cannot use it for sleeping purposes. So the next thing we want to do is we want to look at what the costs are going to be. I need to be able to tell my client on a new development deal what the monthly charges are going to be and what the taxes are projected to be. However, one thing I like brokers to know all of the time, be very careful. Taxes can change, and it's the one area in a building purchase on a new development that the buyer is not going to have recourse against the developer because the taxes are triple or double than what they were predicted to be. So you need to be very careful with that. Same thing when it comes to a tax abatement. The tax abatement, if a developer plans on applying for a 421A, a 421G, or whatever the new program then is, it's not a guarantee that it's going to come through until it does. And so we also want to be careful on limiting the strength of our representations to areas that we know cannot change. And so remember, taxes are determined by certain specialists that look at the records of what taxes are today, and then using the formulas that currently exist, they then project it at a date in the future. However, that can change a lot. It can also change a lot because what happens on new development, until the Department of Taxation and Finance does a full entire assessment of the new development property, until that happens, we don't know what the taxes are going to be, what the fully assessed taxes will be. We only have the projections. Now, the projected real estate taxes for the first year are always contained in the offering plan. Now, again, I highlight in here regarding the taxes and the fact that they can change because I want to make sure that in the very off chance, because it's not often, but I've had it happen to clients, that the taxes are 40% higher than they were projected. I need to be able to say to my client, I did warn you that this can happen. Check your due diligence report. And I hate to be that way. I hate to do the I told you so. But the problem is I also don't want to be getting sued. And that is a reason people would sue if I didn't catch that for them and advise them of that. I want to know how power is provided on every property. And here we're told that each unit owner will be responsible for the costs to bring natural gas and electricity to the units. They have separate meters already there, so each unit owner is going to pay for their own usage. This particular plan was declared effective in February of 2024. So by July, when we closings had not yet happened at the time that we went to contract, but there were 6 under contract. And so we were the final unit to go to contract. Now, they did have the first year's budget projected in the plan. At the time that I was retained, there was not yet any temporary certificate of occupancy. Now, where it says not applicable, and since they didn't have it yet, I don't even recall off the top of my head, but I'm pretty sure based on that, it means that this developer was going to get a final certificate of occupancy. And that does happen sometimes on certain buildings. Not sure if it happened here. We're going to go on and keep reading to see. Utilities. We always want to know what utilities are included in the carrying costs for any particular building. Here, each unit will be individually heated and cooled, and there is no common heating and cooling units provided. There would be hot water provided to each individual unit, and the plan talks about what these costs are projected to be. Now, water and sewer comes through the city of New York, and buildings are required to have water meters, either a meter for the entire building or sub-meters, where each part of a property's block might be paying for their own water, as is true here in this situation, in this property. Now, lot line windows are found in what's called the special risks section of the offering plan. Some, not most, but some older offering plans did not have lot line windows listed anywhere in the offering plan, and not in a special risk section. That started happening, I think, with the newer developments. But there's any new development will have it, and even most of the old ones did have it. This particular building does not have any lot line windows. For those of you who are unaware, a lot line window does physically look different. Back many, many decades ago, a lot line window, they used chicken wire in the glass. So you physically could see these little diamond shape or like stop sign octagon shapes of wire in the windows. These days, it doesn't look like that. It's just a shatterproof glass that's used, because a lot line window means that there's a potential for a building to get built where it would cover a particular window because that window is on the lot line. And New York City has what's called sliver laws. And those sliver laws allow buildings to be built literally on top of each other. And so we need to be careful in making sure that those windows do get identified for our clients. The biggest concern is where somebody's buying in a building and they have these fabulous views, and yet there are lot line windows, which means that it's possible that that window will get blocked. Even where the building may not necessarily have a lot line window, or better stated, where the building directly next to the property we're discussing will not be built up higher that would block a particular window. However, if the view is, let's say, of water and there's another building behind the building next to the lot line, that building might get built up. And that's it. That I will say, I personally do not like making representations as to anything in the future. Why? Because things like lot line windows, things like air rights, we never can predict where an exception is going to be made. And I'll point out a few things that have happened historically that were game changers for lot line windows. And I think that one of the most well-known ones is Grand Central Station. It used to be said that the air rights above Grand Central were worthless. Why? Because you weren't allowed to build up until an exception was made when a company, SL Green, wanted to do a deal and they offered to rebuild the area on Vanderbilt in exchange for the ability to build a tower up. And that was granted. And so those cheap air rights, all of a sudden, were a lot more valuable. Now, another really good example is the High Line. The High Line took air rights that were designated to the special district, being the theater district, I believe. Many of them came from there. In certain cases, we've had air rights, like in the example of Grand Central. Those air rights, I know at least some of them, if not all, were taken from air rights somewhere along the East River. My point being, we don't know what the city will do at some other point in time. The only thing that we can really do is maybe, I know Title Vest has a product where you can order an air rights report and you're allowed to pick, I think, 5 buildings it comes with to see what air rights exist or have been sold. I don't recall exactly how it works, but even that, you're never going to get a guarantee that nothing could ever happen unless, of course, your building is right on the water or your building is facing a public street. It's very unlikely a building is going to be built in the middle of a street. I don't like to make those representations. And so my due diligence is definitely limited to the building itself. That's not to say that I'm not looking for lot line windows, but I can't say that the building 2 buildings over won't block my client's view at some point in time. I could only tell them the information that we have today. Now, the special risk section of an offering plan contains other information besides just whether or not there are lot line windows. That's where we're going to find out certain things like whether or not there's asbestos in the building. And we might say, well, how can a building have asbestos? That's a new development. And the answer is maybe it's a building that was, for the most part, got renovated, but maybe it's a building where they didn't take the kitchen floors out and instead they encapsulated old asbestos that existed in the glue on the linoleum tiles on the kitchen floor. And the cost to abate it is so great that the developer decides that they're going to just encapsulate those floors. That means that the asbestos is getting covered over. There was a new development on, I believe it was 90th Street many years ago. I'm not mentioning which it was, it doesn't matter. And when they did the offering plan, they failed to mention that there was asbestos under certain floors. And so when asbestos is not exposed or remains encapsulated, it's not dangerous. But that doesn't mean that it doesn't have to be disclosed in every offering plan. So what ended up happening was people had the right to cancel their deals. People had the right to have it abated or just accept it as is. I don't know if they were able to get it abated. I think they were able to get out of the deal or accept it as is. Anyway, there was more to it than that because people were already in contracts, so different deals were made. But the bottom line being that asbestos is another example of something that would be in a special risk section, and it would be a mistake to not list it in the offering plan if asbestos does exist. And so that offering plan I'm referring to had to be amended so that it would state what had happened with the asbestos under the subflooring in the kitchens. Now, another topic that would be found these days in the special risk section of the offering plan is lead paint. Now, if a building is done ground up, there would not be asbestos because asbestos stopped existing in 1979. It was no longer used. That's not to say that you don't have to do asbestos testing anytime you're looking to do construction in a building in New York City, because you do, because you never know what products were used in the materials. And so even though it doesn't exist, it doesn't just the requirements. Same thing with lead paint. Lead paint was no longer allowed to be used after 1978. Most buildings built before 1978 will have lead paint in them. A developer that was doing a new development, maybe there is lead paint in the basement area, underground. Maybe they did a totally new building, but they kept the foundation. If that's the case, they would have to list and disclose where the asbestos is. Asbestos would also be in the special risk section. I recall a deal I did once that didn't have any place to keep the garbage in the building, and that was listed in the special risks section. I had a deal that there was an area of the building that the hallway was not wide enough. Hallways need to be 36 inches. They had a hallway that wasn't wide enough. That deficiency was listed in the special risks section of the offering plan. In this particular building, and every building, every new development, we always want to know, when is the sponsor going to be out of the building? When do the unit owners get to take over control and take over the board? In this particular building, there would be 3 individuals who have voting rights. And what is very typical in new development is that the sponsor will lose control of the building within different time frames. And it's very common that they have full control of the building for the first 5 years from the first closing of a unit, or whenever the sponsor owns less than 25% of the common interest of all units. Now, some buildings say when it's 90%, some say 50%. So it's, but the 5-year or some other factor is a very common formula that gets used in new development. And then it designates how it's going to work during each period, as it does here. Now, I spoke a little bit before about mortgages. There was a point in time in history where if a building, if a new development was done and had a preferred lender on it, which is very common, what would happen is the preferred lender would agree to be able to close no matter what. they're agreeing that we're going to close even if you're the first unit in the building. And generally speaking, what that means is that the building likely did some financing with this lender. Maybe they did a mezzanine loan, whatever it is, a construction loan. And as a quid pro quo, the developer might say to the lender, I need you to agree to close on my units. Now, this particular building, they did have a preferred lender that required at least 30% of the units to be in contract. And as long as that existed, then the lender would agree to fund your loan. Remember, in this report, I had stated that this was the last unit. 6 units were already in contract. And so I don't really have to worry about 30% being in contract because I already have 90% in contract. Now, the condominium speaks to whether or not you need to contain certain provisions that are required here when it comes to the financing. But in this particular instance, the condo had not applied for any Freddie or Fannie loans, and therefore they didn't need to do it. Now, we want to know whether or not a developer has the money to do the development, to complete the project. Here, the developer had sufficient funds to finish, and therefore they didn't need to post a bond. Are there washers and dryers in the unit, washer and dryer in the unit, or is there a laundry room? For me, I know my clients, that is a question that they want answered. Why? Because many people want to have a washer and dryer in their own home. Now, we want to know if there is a washer and dryer, we want to know whether or not it's gas or electric. Here, the sponsor was not providing the washer and dryer or any blinds. The buyers would have to get those appliances themselves. The sponsor was just going to provide the actual hookup so that you can install the electric washer and the vented dryer. Now, if there was, and also they have the purchasers being responsible for any of the water and drainage that needs to be done there, they would only be doing standard plumbing. Of course, refrigerator, dishwasher, stove provided in the units. And just so that you're all aware, you do need to have a stove, a dishwasher, you need a kitchen. In residential units, they need to be sold, especially if there's going to be financing. A bank will not close without a functioning kitchen in place. Unless, of course, the bank is doing the loan and they know that this is going to be, and they're doing a construction loan. That would be different. Now, working capital, it's very, very common and was basically the norm, especially as new developments were, started coming up in the early 2000s, where a new development would generally have a buyer pay anywhere between 1 and 5 months of common charges at the time of closing. What we see now is that older buildings, whether they're co-ops or condos, the vast majority have implemented a transfer fee due at closing from either the buyer or the seller, and that money generally is going into a reserve fund. Now, obviously, the new developments they already knew that buildings will always need money. And so now it's just the norm. If you're doing a new plan, you're making sure that there's a capital contribution. And most buildings, most co-ops do have a flip tax. And if the co-op doesn't have a flip tax, then most co-ops do seek at some point in time to implement a flip tax, because a flip tax, again, provides for extra money to go into the building's reserves. Now, the next thing talks about mandatory arbitration and basically says that unless there's a rule or a law in New York that conflicts with this requirement, that in the event of any dispute between unit owners and the condo board and between the sponsor and the board, that the parties would submit to arbitration. And the rules that they would use and how it would work are all indicated here. I always want to know whether or not there is a warranty on the roof. Why? Because roofs leak. And so here we have a limited installer's warranty that needed to be provided, and it was good for 5 years. Now, let's go a little further, roofs and terraces. I always want to know if there's outdoor space. The reason I want to know is because there are different rules and different things that I want to be looking into where my client might be responsible for anything to do with a roof or a terrace. The reason being, if you have a client that wants to put a deck on a roof that they have, they really need to understand what that means. Because when you have access to a roof or a terrace, it's generally considered a limited common element, which means that the building is required to maintain it, but the owner of the unit has their own exclusive access to it. But what that also means is that if the unit owner decorates the area and something happens, they're going to have to be the ones to take up their tiles, their stone, whatever they put there, and then relay them after the roof gets fixed. Now here, in this particular instance, that's just a general ideas. But here, the roof terraces, we're going to have concrete pavers, and it explains what's going to be there. And then here, any other, taking care of it would be the responsibility of the unit owner. Now here, because there's a roof and there's only one person up there, it's that unit 4F that is responsible for their own roof area. And there's no warranty on that. Measurements. Measurements can really vary depending upon how and where the measurements are taken. Measurements can get taken from inner wall to inner wall, inner wall to outer wall, outer wall to outer wall. If you have 5 different people come in, I bet you that you will have 5 different measurements. Now, remember I was saying before that taxes are something that can be wrong? Other items can't, and there's only allowed to be a 5% deviation. First closing. In the offering plan, it generally states when the first closing will be. Here it had stated for January of 2024, which hadn't happened yet back in July because they didn't even have a TCO. Now, they had a new projection of when it will be. And I always want to make sure that I know whether or not my client must close by a certain date, because if they need to close by a certain date, I need to know that my client has the right to cancel if it doesn't close by that date. And I always address that in my due diligence report. Now, what the other issue that I like to address is what kinds of warranties a building has. Now, this particular building is less than 5 stories, and so certain warranties don't apply. And the maximum warranty that this sponsor was giving was limited to 25% of the purchase price of the unit. Now, any conflict between the sponsor's obligations and the plans filed must be as the plans are filed. So that can be a deviation. Now, here we talk about a final CO and a TCO. And here, as I said, you can close with a new development with a TCO. I personally prefer not to. I like to get the final CO because a TCO is only good for 90 days. Now, we have the sponsors were obligated to get the TCO within 2 years of closing. Here, we knew it was coming quickly, so my client didn't care. They wanted to close. Window guards. Window guards, you need window guards in every unit where there's a child that's 11 or older in an apartment. There's no superintendent requirement in a building that's less than 10 units. This unit being 7 units does not require it. However, we just noted, because it was noted in the offering plan, what it would cost them if they did want to bring in a porter or somebody. Owners are responsible for their own garbage to be removed, not kept in the common areas. And we know that the sponsor can put in a reserve fund. We didn't yet know whether or not that was going to happen. We always want to know about the condo's insurance, because if the condo doesn't have insurance, no unit owner is going to be able to get it. And last but not least, closing costs. I always want to advise my clients what their costs are going to be on this transaction. Now, I'm going to have my assistant, when she sends out certificates, share a copy of this report with anybody that would like it. This tells us different taxes that would be due, what closing costs typically might be, etc. If you guys have any questions, you're welcome to reach out to me. Please do sign out in the chat. This class was also streamed on YouTube and will probably be posted on my media, because it is one of my very in-depth teaching classes that I think are extraordinarily important for all brokers and owners and buyers and sellers to be aware of. Anyway, with that, wishing everyone a happy Friday, and I look forward to seeing you all soon. Take care. Thank you, everyone. Have a great weekend.